So, thank you very much for the invitation to speak at this occasion. And I have got a very generous allocation of time, something like half an hour. I think I will try to do it with a little less than that, in order not to bore you too much. So first of all, a brief overview on the issues I will address. Already in the name of this conference, we are putting the emphasis on what is going to happen globally. A lot of what is happening in Europe now is actually driven of what happened in Fukushima a little more than 1 year ago. I will give you a couple of points of why we in Denmark believe that there is a cluster of benefits linked to moving away from fossil fuels. I will tell you a little about the European Union. Denmark holds for this half year the presidency of the European Union, and I will tell you a little about the European Union's long-term targets and also something about energy efficiency, which is the top priority for the Danish presidency in the energy field. Unfortunately, we are not making so much progress that we would like to do. And finally, I will spend most of the time on Denmark's long-term plans and recently adopted energy plan for 2020. So first, 5 key drivers of global, and I'm tempted to say global, regional, and national energy policy. And energy security, as you know, is a high priority in any national or global energy policy to get the amount of energy when there is the necessary demand for it. That it should be a security of supply at affordable prices, and that means that it should be at prices that makes it possible still to have economic growth. And we are, in fact, at a level of oil prices where there's a kind of question mark on whether we can really have sustained economic growth at a significant level with the kind of oil prices we have to deal with for the time being. We have to take into account not only climate issues, but also other more conventional environmental issues. And we have to do it in a way which is consistent with safety for people and societies. And here we come close to what happened in Japan, which, as you know, has led to the fact that out of 53 nuclear power plants in Japan, 0 nuclear power plants is today online. That might be changed, but it might also take some time. So that has had a dramatic effect in Japan, and also, as you know, in Germany, Switzerland, Italy, and other countries. So it is a fact that we have high and fluctuating oil prices globally, and we are feeling that also in the European Union. The prices in 2011 for the oil imports to the European Union was 100 billion euros higher than it was in 2010. And the bill for importing oil is already 600 billion euros for the European Union. If we look at the future for oil, the International Energy Agency in Paris has many times stated that the era of cheap oil is over. The International Monetary Fund, as late as today or yesterday, stated that they find the most of the projections of the future oil prices too optimistic. They expect that we will meet higher oil prices and also prices on other fossil fuels like natural gas in the future. Everybody knows about shale gas, the dramatic development of that in US, and the dramatic effect on gas prices in the United States. The question is whether the cost level, the price level of natural gas and shale gas in US is sustainable, because as far as we can see from a European viewpoint, the way it is exploited is non-sustainable, which has also led to that in a country like France is today a ban on shale gas. So also in natural gas and shale gas, there is a lot of uncertainty. The price of coal on the world market will depend very much on something that is beyond our control, namely, will China continue to be an importer of coal, or will they succeed to use their domestic resources in the western part of China in such a way that they do not need to import coal? And at the stage where China changed and began to import coal from the world market, it had a dramatic increase on the coal prices globally as a result of that. With coal is, of course, the climate change problems very imminent and dominant, because coal is emitting a lot of greenhouse gases. And the hope for the coal industry and the fossil fuel industry had been carbon capture and storage, the technology with which you can take away the CO2 from burning fossil fuels. The statement here, painfully slow, is from the International Energy Agency's Energy Technology Perspectives report that will be published in June this year, where it states that the development on renewable energy seems to be satisfactory compared to our 2 degrees scenarios goals. The development on energy efficiency is not fully satisfactory and takes place too slow, and the development on carbon capture and storage is painfully slow. There's, as I don't need to elaborate on that, there's a lot of uncertainty about the future for nuclear power. There's also a lot of uncertainty about how fast will the demand for energy in the emerging economies, how fast will that take place. And all in all, you have a picture where you can say that there's a lot of uncertainties on the future energy markets. So actually, if you only had one word to your disposal to description of the global future energy markets, the right word to use would be uncertainty. Unfortunately, there are also some uncertainty about renewable energy. Renewable energy is becoming more and more competitive. As I told recently to the press conference in the other room, you might know that in the European Union, in the generating electricity capacity in 2011, 60% of new electricity generating capacity in the European Union was based on photovoltaic in 2011, 60%. Nobody would have believed in that 4 years ago. 20% was based on wind energy and only 20% based on fossil fuel, namely natural gas. So renewable energy is becoming more and more competitive at the same time, and not only because the fossil fuel prices seem to continue to rise, but also because the renewable energy sources seems to continue to decrease. On energy efficiency, we have some bad news that in 2010, for the second year in a row, the energy intensity, that means the consumption of energy per unit of GDP, actually increased, so that more energy was used per unit of GDP. And that has now happened in 2 consecutive years, and that is one of the reasons why the Danish presidency is putting so much emphasis on adoption of the directive for energy efficiency in the European Union. A few slides to demonstrate what is happening on the world markets, and this is the issue of world fossil liquid supply by type, And this is in the new policy scenario of the International Energy Agency. So that means the scenario where we take into account the positive developments that are taking place in relation to hopefully continued energy efficiency and more transition to low carbon. But still in that scenario where some good developments are taking place, you will see that we will still, to a very high degree, be dependent on not only the dark blue, the currently producing, but also the lighter blues yet to be developed, yet to be found, and to a very high degree on unconventional oil, which means, for instance, oil produced under very difficult circumstances. So this demonstrates that we will, even in a new policy scenario, if we continue along those lines, we will be very heavily dependent on oil and gas production in a way that we are not very familiar with, and we're based on resources that we have not really proven as being existing. This is how the energy demand in a new policy scenario will develop. So this demonstrates the growth, and as you can see in the bottom of the slide, you see that OECD in general, as an average, is at a stable level, and you can see that the big growth is the yellow color, China, the brown color, India, and other developing countries in Asia and in Russia. This is a complicated slide, but the main point is that the window of opportunity for achieving to move into the 2-degree scenario is closing. And that is based on the fact that if you invest in conventional power plants, then the economic lifetime of that will be somewhere between 25 and 40 years. And that means that if you do that, every time you do that, you lock yourself into a fossil fuel future. And already today, the capacity we need for the next 20, 30 years, 85% of that is already locked into conventional technologies, and therefore it is urgent to move towards more climate-friendly and more security of supply-friendly technologies and fuels. There are many benefits linked to moving beyond fossil fuels. One of them is economic reason, and it is not only a question about high prices and probably continuing increase in the fossil fuel prices. It is also a question of the volatility of the prices, which makes it very difficult for companies to make their investments calculations. In US, there is a figure for how expensive it is for the American industry to have to hedge against expected or possible increases in the fuel prices. So the prices are unpredictable, which is very inconvenient for industry. And it is also a question about whether the European Union, US, will continue to be dependent on an increasingly limited number of oil and gas producing countries. And as you know, the biggest resources are in countries like Saudi Arabia, Russia, Iraq, Iran. And the question is how comfortable it is to continue to be dependent of that kind of countries. For the environment and climate, it is a problem to continue to burn fossil fuel. On the European Union, you know that the target is to reduce with 80 to 95% the greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And that is, of course, consistent with IPCC. The target is to transform the European Union to a low-carbon economy in 2050. And you know the targets set for 2020, 20% renewable energy, 20% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, 20% increased energy efficiency, 10% biofuel. The EU Energy Efficiency Directive, I mentioned that briefly. The negotiations are very complicated. In the European Parliament, we had 1,800 proposed changes to the directive, to the proposed directive. So we are struggling with that in these weeks and months. There are big benefits linked to adoption of the EU Energy Efficiency Directive, increased GDP, increased net employment, and reduced cost for investments in energy generation. And briefly, if you look at the total calculations, then the total cost impacts of the directive, even only to the 2020 period, are negative. That means that there is an average reduction in overall spending of about 20 billion euros per year. And this is even based on conservative expectations on the oil prices. So if the oil prices are at the level of where they are now, and where we have a reason to believe that they will be in the future, then the economic benefits of adopting this directive will be even far bigger. And then finally, to the Danish government's long-term goals for energy policy is to have 100% renewables in our energy supply, both for electricity, heating, industry, and transportation. And it is worthwhile to mention that we have no hydropower in Denmark. The highest mountain in Denmark is a hill, less than 200 meters, so we cannot rely on that sort of renewable energy supplier. It is an important target to phase out coal from the Danish supply pattern, and that should take place in 2030, or will take place in 2030. And in 2035, electricity and heat will be 100% based on renewable energy, and that means mostly wind energy and biomass. They are the two sources we count most upon. So the headline results for 2020 are here. More than 35% renewable energy in the final energy consumption. Our EU target was 30%, but with the plan that has now been adopted, we can achieve 35% renewable energy in final energy consumption. And about 50% of the electricity will in 2020 be based on wind power. And that is an extremely high figure, and I don't know any other country which will have a similar high figure nationwide. At the same time, and this is important, that there will be a reduction, a little less than 8% reduction in the gross energy consumption in relation compared to 2010. So almost 1% reduction per year in gross energy consumption. Already now, Denmark has the lowest energy consumption per unit of GDP, but we still think that it is possible for our country and for almost all other countries to have continued reduction in energy consumption, and that will lead to significant benefits, as I demonstrated before. It will also lead, these main points will also lead to a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions compared to 1990. So how to reach the 50% of electricity by 2020? So that needs, in addition to the system we already have, which provides us with something like 28% of our total electricity generation today come from wind, but we will need to add more wind turbines capacity onshore, close to the coast, and offshore. And in order to deal with the transmittancy problems, we will have a comprehensive strategy for smart grids. In buildings, we will convert to renewable energy. What you see on the picture are two sweating men taking out of a house an oil-fired furnace. So there will simply be a ban on installation of oil-fired boilers in private homes, in new buildings from 2013, and in old buildings from 2016. This underlines that the transformation we think is necessary also requires some relatively firm, somebody would say even brutal regulation in order to achieve the targets. The idea of the magic of the market forces, I think it is a long time ago that anybody has believed that that can do it alone. It is very useful to use the market forces, but don't believe that they can do it alone. Other initiatives are dealing with transportation, electric vehicles, better framework conditions for biogas, and also for more renewable energy in industry. And then the final slide demonstrates that it has taken something like 2 or 3 years to make it possible for 95% of the seats of the parliament, almost 100% of the seats of the parliament, is now supporting this energy strategy for Denmark. So it has required very, very heavy negotiations, and we have been very, very closely down into the details of what would the cost for doing this ambitious transition, what would that be? And therefore, we have confidence in that we are on the very safe side when we have calculated the costs for doing it. And the brief figure is that the cost will be about €3 per week per household. And €3, that is close to what a small burger, actually one which is a little smaller than the one you see at the picture, the price for that in a shop in Copenhagen. So that demonstrates that this can be done, and it can be done at very low costs. And I have to underline that this is based on some very conservative oil prices, actually oil prices in the level of $80, $90 per barrel. And if the oil prices and other fossil fuel prices are continuing to increase as we have to expect now, then it would lead not to a cost of one burger per household per week, but probably to the income in the order of magnitude of a couple of burgers per household per heat. The way in which it is financed is via the tariffs, via PSO financing, but the net result is what you have seen here, due to very big savings in fuel consumption. So if I should deliver some key messages from our experience, then they are lined up here. It is very important that you can demonstrate that it is affordable. Whenever you talk about these changes, then a lot of people will claim that this is too expensive and we can't do that in a time of economic crisis. Our reasoning is the same as Barack Obama said when he was elected president. We have to make this change in favor of renewable energy, not in spite of the crisis, but because of the crisis. We believe that it is proven that it is technically feasible to make that transition, and that we can overcome the transmittancy problems that often are mentioned in relation to renewable energy. We have already proved that this works well in the Danish market, with 28% coming from wind electricity, and that is partly due to a very well-developed transmission grid systems. And this development will deliver new business opportunities for economic growth. So briefly, what I told you was about the main factors in energy policy globally, regionally, and nationally, that there are many uncertainties, in the global energy supply of conventional energy sources, and that it would lead to fragile economies if we continue to be dependent on fossil fuels, and that moving towards independency of fossil fuels create multiple benefits. Our experience is that, and I think everybody that deals with renewable energy could sign up to that, that unless you can secure a global carbon price for the future, then the next best thing you can do is to have national and regional stable policy frameworks in order to encourage investors to go that way in favor of energy efficiency and renewable energy. And if you're not doing that, then you are running risk of that you have to enter into financial arrangements and guarantees and loans and supports, which could be very expensive. So that is why we in Denmark has put the emphasis on establishing a long-term, stable policy framework covering 95% of the seats of the parliament. And we still believe that there's still a lot of things we have to do, but this is a good beginning in our viewpoint. Thank you for your attention.